Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
All right, my name's Deb. I'm a real alcoholic. Hi. Oh, it is an honor and a privilege to be here in Corpus Christi at an AA function. I'll tell you what, thank you so much for having me, Ray. Thanks for calling and asking me to come and be one of the speakers this weekend. I have to tell you, the moment that she said it's in South Texas on the water in winter, I said yes. Please, yes. And then for assigning me Liz as a hostess, she's really, really absolutely lovely, so thank you. And she took us to one of your finest local establishments last night, Astor's, and fed us, and it's just great. And there are some friends of mine that are here this weekend as well. My friend Glenn traveled in from California to be with me for the weekend, and I appreciate him giving up his time to come and spend some time. And Palmer from Miami, I get to run into Palmer from time to time, and just thrilled to see him. And Billy, and I had met Jeff before, and so it's just really nice, because sometimes you fly into these things and you get off the plane and I don't know a soul. And so it's nice to fly in, and it seems to happen to me in Texas. When I fly into Texas, all of a sudden I'm among friends almost instantly. And like Judy came up and sent me greetings from a pal of mine from Houston this morning, so I thank you for that very much. You know, we speak at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings so that we may relate to one another and so that we may learn from one another's stories a little bit about the individual journey through sobriety. I'm going to tell you what it was like, you know, what my alcoholism was like, what happened to bring me into Alcoholics Anonymous, and then try to give you a snapshot of what it's been like since I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been sober since March 15th, 1987. I know. Some folks aren't impressed by a good long run of days all put together, but I am still fairly impressed when I wake up every morning and I'm still sober and I'm still a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I had a drinking dream not that long ago. I've been sober for, you know, coming up on 26 years of sobriety, and I had a drinking dream. And you know, and the girls that I have worked with in the past, they would call me and they'd say, "Oh my God, I had a drinking dream. I must be doing something wrong." And I said, No, honey, that's just confirmation you're alcoholic. You know, I can guarantee you that social drinkers don't have drinking dreams. I can guarantee it. And I just had a drinking dream a couple of nights ago, and I thought, I must be a real alcoholic. You know, I was given my talk in New Orleans right before the storm, and I know I love that city. And anyway, when I was starting to give my pitch, I told the audience that I had gotten, you know, sober when I was 15 years old, and that I had been sober for so many years, and that I had, you know, was currently this age and whatever. And after that talk, in the thank the speaker line, there was one of their old timers came up to me, a white-headed guy, and he got up to me, he shook my hand, and he says, "You know," he said, "when you started talking, I did the math. I figured out you got sober at 15. I quit listening." And I'm thinking, dude, this is the thank the speaker line. And he says, "But God made me listen anyway." He said, "And I'll be damned if you're not a real alcoholic." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he says, "You know," he says, "I'm going to quit ignoring them young people in my home group." He said, "I'm going to go home." He said, "I'm going to pick me out one and sponsor him." And I met that young man from Lafayette, Louisiana shortly thereafter, and he was like, "It's your fault. I cannot shake this old guy." So, anyway, I was born and raised in a really small town right outside of Akron, Ohio. It was a little town, 5,000 people. Everybody who lived there, their families had connections and roots back in the hills of West Virginia. When the coal mines started closing down, folks just moved to Ohio because that's where the industry was. And they could get decent paying jobs and try to raise their families with some dignity and respect and not breathe in that black that black coal dust anymore, and try to put a life together. And my father's family, they did that. My mom's family, they came out of the farms in the hills of western Pennsylvania. And anyway, so my dad was one of 9 kids. They all lived in this same little town, so I was essentially related to everyone. And and my dad, because they literally moved out of the hills of West Virginia, they used to get picked on a lot and called hillbillies and things of that nature. And I never saw anything wrong with it. I thought it was a funny word, and just didn't bother me a bit, but it bothered them a whole lot. And my dad's people, they were really good, salt of the earth folks who worked really, really hard. And they all got union jobs, and they really tried to buckle down and raise their families, but that family was just riddled with alcoholism. I mean, riddled with it. My grandfather died before I was born, and he died of cirrhosis of the liver, black lung, and throat cancer. He had a good, hard run. They used to, run whiskey in the hills, and, that whole thing. Did you see the movie Lawless that was out not long ago? I was like, oh my God, they put my people on the big screen? Oh my goodness, and it's a great movie about run and shine and doing all kinds of stuff. And those are my father's people, but they always wanted better. They always wanted better, and so they worked really hard at getting better, but they could not overcome alcoholism as a group, as a family. They couldn't overcome alcoholism. And my dad has alcoholism. He's never recovered from alcoholism. Glenn actually got to meet him a week or 2 ago at my nephew's wedding, and I can tell you that is one broken, lonely, sad, angry man. He just is. He's gotten very small. His world is incredibly small. He can't move around much anymore. He's had a stroke. He's got gout in both legs. He's got signs of cirrhosis that he's had for years. He's just a small, angry, broken man. And I don't see him that often. The way I was raised, I was supposed to just keep my mouth shut and just do what they all did. And instead of doing that, I got sober. And my life got big, and it got full, and it got good. And I went to college, and I did all this stuff that people in that family don't do. And so our relationship's been very interesting because I represent him everything he always wanted but couldn't quite touch because he had alcoholism. Anyway, so, growing up in alcoholism, it really shaped a lot of those early experiences. As all of you who've grown up in alcoholism or experienced it in a significant way, it just has an enormous impact on the way we act, the way we feel, and the way we see the world, and that was absolutely true for me. When I was a little girl, I was terrified of everything. Terrified of everything. I didn't know that I was living in terror, but I absolutely was. And I would watch my father because he was the guy who he was my first higher power. If you grew up in alcoholism, we understand the concept of a higher power far before we're introduced to the concept of God. And my father was the higher power. If he felt a certain way, we all felt the same way. We decided how we were going to act based on what he was expecting if we could possibly figure it out. And that's alcoholism. And so when I was a little girl, I was just terrified of everything because when he drank, he also got very, very violent most of the time. And so we were always walking on eggshells. We were always trying to figure out what the right thing was to do. And lo and behold, there was no right thing to do. We didn't know that. We had no idea. But I was terrified. And there are pictures of me, actually almost all the pictures of me when I'm a little girl. My shoulders are pinned to my ears. And my little hands are balled up in fists. And this is how I was walking around when I was 6 and 7 years old. And I'll tell you what I figured out was that being scared made me very, very vulnerable. And that being scared, I figured all this out. I had no words for it. But I figured this out when I was a little girl, that being scared wasn't a great option, but being angry was very powerful because my father was angry, and he was very powerful. And so I put on the coat of anger, and I wore it. So I walked around like this, and I was very angry, and I became the neighborhood bully. I was the kid who would chase other little kids home from school. I ran the neighborhood. All the boys, all the girls, nothing happened in that neighborhood if it didn't pass by me first. I mean, there were no ramps built, there were no dance routines made up, there were no sledding runs made, there was nothing happened in that neighborhood if it didn't pass my muster, period. And if you didn't, there were consequences to pay. And I've been a natural leader. My report cards in second grade would say, you know, Deb is a real natural leader. We just wish she would use her powers for good. And in fifth grade, the report card said, she seems to want to incite riots in the classroom, and we're not really sure why. But I was just angry all the time, because once you start acting angry, you begin to own it. And so I owned anger and I owned fear, and it was way deep down inside me, and that was just my normal course of a day. And you know, growing up in alcoholism, there's all kinds of sights and sounds and smells, and if you spend time kind of going back in that and spending some time in that, we can all recall that from our own drinking or from the drinking of those around us. And you know, there are still, the sound of rubber tires rolling down a gravel driveway will still raise the hair on the back of my neck, make me sit up really straight and take a quick inventory and make sure I'm acting right. Because we had a gravel driveway, and we would listen for those tires coming down, which meant that my father was coming home. And we would try to snap to and act right as quickly as we could. And you know, I didn't understand what alcoholism was. I did know that my dad drank a lot, and my mother wanted him to stop. She didn't drink anything ever, nothing. And he drank all the time. And I knew that that was important because they would fight about it. And when I would ask them what alcohol was, nobody would ever explain it to me. All they would say is, that stuff's for adults and you don't need to worry about it. And I'm thinking, not worry about it? It seems pretty darned important. But I'm not supposed to worry about it because that stuff's for adults. And I thought, all right, well, I'll just go figure it out for myself. And so I had my first drink of alcohol, not because of alcoholism, not because of anything. It was because of baseline curiosity. I wanted to know what that stuff was and why it was so freaking important. That was it. I spent the night with a girlfriend of mine. Her parents had a full bar in their basement. We started picking bottles off the bar based on their labels. Some of them we'd take the cap off and it'd smell real bad, so we'd put the cap on and just skip over to the next bottle. My first choice was Christian Brothers. They had little pilgrims on the label at the time. I used to say it was Christian Brothers whiskey. And one time I was telling my story like this, and Sister Maurice was sitting in the audience, and she said, honey, that's brandy. I was like, well, leave it to the religious to know their booze. And anyway, I have no idea how much I had to drink that very first night. I was 9 years old. But we were just taking sips off of the tops of every bottle we could get to. I think we split a couple of beers in the refrigerator. And I have no idea how much I had to drink or what it took. But at some point, there was enough alcohol that got into my system to where I felt the effects of it. And I can tell you, for me, the effect of alcohol was pure, unadulterated magic. What happened for me that night is that my little hands let loose. My shoulders came all the way off my ears. I exhaled for the first time, and I had a moment where I did not feel any fear at all. And to me, to have that kind of relief, and I wasn't looking for relief, I just wanted to know what that stuff was. But alcohol provided me that amazing, overwhelming relief, and I thought, man, I'm going to drink as much of this stuff as often as I can. And the next day, I thought, you know what? My ma just needs a drink. I mean, that woman is wound tight. And if she would just drink with him, he wouldn't be mad all the time. Everybody'd get along, and he wouldn't beat us. I mean, I had this figured out. I am 9, and I have experienced drunkenness, and I have got this figured out. But I know, of course, that I'm not supposed to be drinking and that it's illegal and all of that kind of stuff. And you know, when you're 9, you just can't ride your huffy bicycle down through the beverage drive-thru, get a 6-pack, go home, kick back, and watch Scooby-Doo. There are some limitations. And so I drank as much as I could, as often as I could. And I can tell you that in looking back on all of that, I evaluated all my relationships based on whether or not people could get me closer or farther away from booze. If your parents had a bar, you were in my inner circle. If you had older brothers and sisters who were drinking and a little bit careless with their leftovers, you were kind of inner circle, outer ring. I mean, I had a system where I evaluated people just because I knew that I needed to get access to booze and I didn't have the access that I needed. You know, my father was alcoholic, but he would bring home a 12-pack under his arm after work every day. He would drink that, go down the beverage drive-thru, get 6 more, drink those, pass out, and do it all again the next day, so there weren't a lot of leftovers. And so I had to figure out how to get booze. And I can tell you that, drinking when you're way underage is very tough. I had to get very creative. I had to learn how to tweak my lying ability. Now, I'm a child of an alcoholic. I already know how to lie and manipulate, and convince you that it's all your fault when it was really mine. I mean, I have some basic skills when I pick up alcohol. I do. I have some basic skills, but they had to be honed. And so I honed those skills, and I was able to get more and more and more access to alcohol. And by the time I'm a sophomore in high school, I had been drinking for about 6 years. Something happened. I had crossed over that white line into true alcoholism. I was drinking the clock round. I was unable to draw a sober breath. I was no longer able to sober up for the important events. I was unable to keep it together. And I was just drinking to drink to stay out of withdrawal. And that's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of work. Talk about having to hide bottles and have certain routes that I walked and have people that I went and hung out with and certain scenes that I had to work. And there was a dark little house on the wrong side of the tracks in my little town. And I had to cross those tracks and go spend a lot of time at that dark little house over there with the people that inhabited it. And they were the kind of people that thought that there was absolutely nothing wrong at all with buying a 14-year-old her own fifth of vodka every day. They just didn't, I don't think they thought twice about it. But you know what, they were consistent. I knew if I could make it to that house, there would be a bottle waiting on me. And the payment for that bottle was always pretty steep. But if you're drinking round the clock, you don't have to feel those consequences. And so when I would try to get sober and I would try to shake it off and I would try to get it together so that I could do that one thing that was very, very, very important, that became increasingly more and more and more difficult to do. I had to have something to drink in order to get to school. I had to have something to drink at lunch to make it through the afternoon. I had to have something to drink to play that sporting event in the evening or do whatever that extracurricular thing was that I was trying to do to keep all the boxes checked. And I was just slowly becoming more and more and more unable just to function through a normal day because my body required alcohol. And it was the damnedest thing too, because when I would sober up, I would think to myself, okay, I am not going to start drinking again. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But you know what? My head, it's an amazing, amazing thing. Jeff talked about the doctor's opinion last night and the fact that we have the physical allergy of the body. So once we start drinking alcohol, our bodies crave more alcohol. It's the phenomena of craving, and I have that. Oh my goodness, I have that. But I also have a head that convinces me that drinking is my only and best option. It does not matter what happened to me last night or last week. It doesn't even come to play. My mind does not even entertain the consequences of a day or a month or a week ago. It just doesn't. It says, you know what? I think you need to drink. I think if you can just get to that little house and get that bottle in your hands, everything's going to be all right. And I have absolutely no defense against that once it starts. I was unable to stop my head from convincing me to go take a drink. And once I took a drink, guys, it was on. Any daily drinkers in the room? We got a few of us, right? And you guys know what it's like to reach that point where it's like, man, I just don't want to drink today, but not drink, it hurts. It hurts to not drink. And so there's really no option. There's really no option. And what finally happened for me is that I got caught. You see, I had a 3.8 grade point average. I was president of my class. I was playing 3 varsity sports. I was the girl that every mother wanted her son to date. I had all the plates spinning. Now, they were wobbly, but they were spinning. And I was, tentatively keeping it all together. And nobody at school knew what was going on with me. They knew that I was struggling a little bit. They knew that I was deteriorating, but they also knew that I lived with a violent alcoholic. My parents had divorced when I was 12 and my sister was 14. We went to my mom and we're like, Ma, can you get us out of here? And she was staying in the marriage for the kids. We were like, we understand you're staying for the kids, but we're tired. Can you get us out of here? And so my parents had gotten a divorce and the entire town knew about the divorce because, well, I'm related to most of them. And it was really long and it was brutal and, my father just wasn't going to do anything to make that any easier. So it was a horrible thing, and the town knew that my family had been in crisis for a really long time. And so it was okay if I had some bad days. And nobody looked too closely because I went to school every day and I showed up at every sporting event and I continued to get A's. And I was able to keep those things at bay so nobody looked too closely at what was going on. And I have a sister who's 2 years older than me, and I drank and she did drugs. That way there was no conflict of interest in the house. We had a non-competitive environment. And my sister could not keep it together. She absolutely couldn't. She'd do stuff like she'd drop acid and go to school. Well, you do that and you're going to juvie jail. So she was in and out of juvie jail, and she was, just off the chain. I'm like, if you would just drink, because you can get into this deal, especially the daily drinkers, where you're managing. You got it locked down, and you're going to freaking get through the day. But she could not do that. She would take the weird, I don't even know what all she was taking, but she'd take random stuff, and then she'd be off. And all of a sudden, she's in juvie jail, and they're at court, and everything's blowing up, and you know what? I was getting straight A's, and I was still showing up. So I was a heck of a lot easier to ignore than that. And anytime she would calm down a little bit, I'd kickstart her a little. I had to have a distraction. But I finally got caught. It was very, very simple. My mom went out of town supposed to be for a weekend. She ended up going out of town for, about 8 hours, which was the problem. She came home early, and my sister and I, instead of crossing the tracks and going to that dark little house, we called down there and asked them if they could bring the stuff to us. So that we didn't have to go over there. I thought somehow we'd be safer if we were in our own house. It's a wild miscalculation, but they showed up and they came, and the party was brought to our house. And I was a vodka drinker. Not that I ever got to pick, but it seemed like I got my hands on a lot more vodka than I did anything else, and my body was just used to it. We had gotten into that dull hum. And for some reason, they brought me a bottle of Jack Daniels, and somebody said, well, why'd you bring her a whole fifth? She can't drink all that. Well, I do have an ego, and it is intact. And so I drank the entire fifth of vodka very, very quickly. I went into an alcohol stupor. I was curled up into a little ball, sitting in all of my bodily fluids because I'd been unable to move for several hours. And all of my systems were shutting down, and I was slowly sitting there dying. And my mom walked in. So the gig was up to an extent. I was able to lie my way out of some of it, but not all of it. Folks who are qualified for Al-Anon, not Al-Anons, because in order to be an Al-Anon, you have to actually go and work steps and recover from the effects of alcoholism. So those who are qualified for Al-Anon, they have an amazing ability to believe what you tell them rather than what they see and know to be true. I mean, it's impressive. It really is impressive. If you don't know any, just hang around an alcoholic family, it's impressive. And my mom had that. She was begging me. She said, tell me that this isn't true. Tell me that this isn't what was happening. And I was like, well, okay. That's not true. No, that wasn't happening at all. But the gig was up. The police had already been called. There were warrants out for the arrest of these people who had been, serving me booze on a daily basis for a really long time and providing our community with drugs. And it was big, and it was, town-wide, and these are people that are just, they were living in a little railroad town for a reason. They had escaped and they were hiding out there. And so now that there were warrants out for their arrest, it was just, ugly and dangerous. And I thought, in my 15-year-old alcoholic, hazy reasoning, I thought, I need to get out of town. Now, I got no job, I got no car, and I'm not really sure which direction out of town is. But I know I gotta go. I need to get out of town. I needed to get away from this chaos. I need to figure out a way to get out of this jam. I need everybody to just chill out because people were overreacting to the fact that I was drinking every day. I mean, come on. It's just booze. I mean, my dad does it. Freak, the whole town does it. What is the big deal? But I just need to get away from all the chaos for a while, and I got nothing. I got no options except this one that I can remember. There is a hospital in downtown Cleveland, and they have an adolescent unit, and they do 10-day assessments or evaluations on adolescents who are in a jam with alcohol or drugs. And I knew one girl who had been up there for a 10-day assessment, and they let her come home. They assessed her and they said she is fine, and she came home and everybody felt sorry for her because her parents had overreacted. And I thought, by God, that's exactly what I need. I need somebody to validate this overreaction, and I need to get out of town for a few days. So I went and I talked to the guidance counselor, and she said, what happened at your house over the weekend? And so I told her the best lie I could come up with. And I said, but you know, my dad's alcoholic. And she said, well, yes, honey, we all know that. And I said, well, I've had a little something to drink a couple of times, and it's not going well. And she said, well, I guess not. Does it always end up this bad? I said, it's been a little rocky the couple of times I've had a little too much. I said, maybe I should go be evaluated. And she said, is it that bad? And I said, well, I don't think so, but everybody else is really kind of overreacting to this. So maybe if I go get evaluated, people will just chill out a little. And she said, well, alcoholism runs in families. I don't think it'd be a bad idea. She said, I'll get you in there tonight. And I said, tonight? I mean, that's moving a little quick. There's just one more human who's overreacting. And I said, I don't want to leave my ma alone on Thanksgiving. That would just be bad. And she said, okay. She said, you can go in. How about the Saturday after Thanksgiving? I thought that was much more reasonable because I had my affairs to get in order. Now, I don't know what affairs a 15-year-old has to get in order, but I had affairs to get in order. And what that really meant was, I got no idea what I've just signed up for, but I've got to do a little research. I got to do a little recon because I got to know where I'm going and what exactly is going on. And there was a guy running around in that circle of humans I spent too much time in who was not well equipped with morals either. But I knew that he had just gotten out of that same hospital, and I asked him, I said, tell me about that hospital. And he said, yeah. He said, so you're going to that, huh? And I said, yeah. And he said, they lock the adolescent unit. I said, they do what? He said, they lock the adolescent unit. I said, well, why? And he said, because you're adolescents, and it's in a bad neighborhood of Cleveland, and you're in there for drugs and alcohol evaluation. He said, and they lock that unit. And I thought, well, hell, I can't go there. I mean, I've got a system. My system, my bedroom is on the second story of our house, and the basement's half raised. So it's 2.5 stories up, but I've got bed sheets that I tie together. And I get home at 10, and my mom sees me that I'm home okay, and she checks the block for child number 1. I go upstairs, wait for her to go to sleep, and then I shimmy down the side of the house on bed sheets. I got a system in order to drink the way I drink and keep enough in me. And so I'm thinking when I go to this 10-day inpatient stay in the hospital, as soon as the counselors go to sleep, I'm going to sneak out of that hospital, go get me a little something to drink because I got to maintain. You see, and giving up alcohol altogether, that's not an option. I'm not interested in not drinking anymore. I'm interested in people just chilling out and getting off my back and not being angry with me anymore. And the couple of times that I had to put alcohol down and I had to go through that detox process and get it together for something, when I'm not drunk, my head screams. And the things that I see when I close my eyes, it's like watching a merry-go-round of every bad thing that's ever happened, of every person who's ever harmed me, of every bad situation I've ever been in. It's a merry-go-round of nothing but vivid, loud, colorful memories that do nothing more than solidify my shame. I got no tools, I got no God, I can't cope with sobriety, and I'm really just not interested. I would like people to stop being angry and to stop paying such close attention so that I could go back to drinking every day, because that's the only thing that will quiet my mind, and it's not even doing that all that well anymore. So anyway, I decided if I have to go to this place that's locked up and they're going to force sobriety on me, I'm just going to drink myself to death. To me, that seemed like my only reasonable course of action. I'm 15 and I'm planning. I'm not very skillful. So I am just going to drink myself to death, and I put my head down and I go after death with booze like I had never gone after anything in my life. And all that happened to me was that I was all bets were off, all chains were off, and I was just on a solid run. And I was drinking double and triple what I was drinking every day because I was on maintenance drinking, and now I'm on drinking to die. And so I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that I am not going to take my next breath. I'm not going to take my next breath. And I keep coming to, and I keep coming to. And one day I come to And I had been in that hospital in downtown Cleveland, in Glen Bay Hospital, and I'd been there for 3 days, and I would snap out of a blackout. And I'm in the middle of full-blown withdrawal, and they didn't know that adolescents were real alcoholics, so they didn't give me a medical detox. They just put me in a room, gave me pajamas, and let me shake, rattle, and roll. And I came to after that 3 days, and I am, oh man, I'm sober. And I am miserable, and I'm hurting, and I'm sweating, and I'm sick, and my head's screaming, and I got the merry-go-round, and I got no God, and I got no tools, and I got no program, and I got no relief, and I got nothing, and I got to get out of there, and I can't get out of there because the door's locked. And I am absolutely certain that I have just walked into the gates of hell. What also happened is that while I was in that blackout, see, I had a plan. I was only going to tell them about this much of my drinking, not all of it. Just a little bit, just enough to show them why I had gotten in a little bit of a jam and why it was no big deal. And I knew exactly, I had it rehearsed, I knew what I could tell them that wouldn't push me over that threshold of them thinking they needed to intervene further. But while I was in a blackout, I told them the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. And so by the time I snapped out of that blackout, my little chart had a alcoholic stamp on the front of it. The day that I got out of that, at 10 days, they were taking me downstairs and keeping me for 30 more for treatment. That was not in the plan. And I'm riding the elevator down. I get off the elevator, and immediately they call a code, and all the counselors start rolling up their sleeves, and they're running back upstairs where I just came from. And I was like, what in the world's going on? And one of the counselors, as he's running by, looks at me, and he said, your sister's here. It seems that I had gotten honest about what she'd been up to as well. So they tricked my sister into the hospital. She was very unhappy. She was coming up just to visit me because we were running buddies. I mean, we were thick as thieves. And so she was just coming there to visit me, and the door locked behind her, and they threw her pajamas and said, you're not going anywhere. And she tore the place up. And anyway, so 10 days later, here she comes downstairs to do her treatment. Now I have 20 days left. And she gets off the elevator, and I'm thrilled to see her because I haven't seen her for 20 days, and she's my running buddy. I mean, we got each other's backs, you know, she's my person. And I run up to hug her, and she just stopped me, and she said, do not go to sleep. To say that she was angry was, we call that a Midwestern understatement where I'm from. And so I spent the last 20 days of treatment awake, or to the best of my ability. And my sister spent 20 days of treatment trying to figure out how to make my life absolutely as miserable as possible. I got out of there, and I learned as little as I could in treatment, as little as I could. I was a constant disruption to others. I was constantly entertaining myself in my own head. I wasn't interested in any of the information, because here's the deal. I am stone cold sober, I'm physically sober, and I am restless, irritable, and discontented, and I am full of shame and guilt and remorse, and I got no God, and I got no program, and I got no skills, and freaking talking to me is not fixing anything. You want me to go to another lecture about the family dynamics of the disease of alcoholism, like what is that doing to fix this? Honestly, you're going to talk. And then you put me in a circle of other kids and you want me to talk. Like, what in the world is that going to do? And every day I would just wake up and I like, people, just shut up. Stop talking. If you'll just let me out of here and let me get a drink, I'll be fine. But I'm not fine. I'm not going to be fine. And sitting in your groups isn't going to make me fine. I just need a drink. And I just needed out of there. But I played the game, and I checked the boxes because I'm really good at that. And I got out of there. And when I'm leaving, my sister grabbed me, and she said, you don't relapse until I get out of here. She said, it's your fault that I'm in here, and you're not going to be out there drinking while I'm in this hellhole because of you. And I was like, fine. She said, you go to our people, and you get our stuff, and you wait. I'll be home in 10 days. And I did. I have no idea why, but I did. I waited on her. And I had our stuff. There was a floorboard. You lift it up, and there's it's like a cooler without the foam. It's right there, and nobody knows it's there except she and I. and it is full of her random stuff, baggies of crap. I don't even know what it is, but it's there for her. And I got bottles, not just one, but bottles, multiple. And so I am ready. It's going to be on. I can feel the relief. I can see it in the distance. It's at 10 days, 9 days, 8 days. She rolls in to the house after getting out of treatment. I open the door for her. I'm so excited. I whisk her upstairs. I lift up the floorboard, and I'm like, tonight it's on. I am so ready to have a little bit of relief. And she says, well, they called it a spiritual experience. Who did what? And she said, well, these last couple days of treatment, she said, they called it a spiritual experience. And we're going to stay sober. And I said, no. No, we're not. And she said, yes, we are. We're going to go to AA. I said, go to AA? You don't even drink. And she said, well, they told me that NA sucks. I have to go to AA. And I was like, we are not going to AA. And she said, yes, we are. We're going to try this first. And if it doesn't work, then we'll relapse. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And she said, no, we're going to AA. Could not believe it. Could not believe it. And so here we go. That night, we're off to AA. My ma drives us. That's really cool. She drops us off 15 minutes before the meeting starts. Like I want to be there any longer than is absolutely necessary. We stand outside. We bum cigarettes. I don't smoke, but I learn. We stand out there smoking cigarettes, trying to act cute and, get dates and stuff. Inappropriate behavior is always welcome in the outskirts of an AA meeting. And we stand outside long enough to be late. We're there 15 minutes early, but we walk into the meeting late. Walk through the center of the room, make as much noise as possible. There's no carpet on the floors, and we have the metal folding chairs, and so I drag the chair just to make sure that I'm there, and somehow I've determined it's your fault. So I'm going to punish everyone in the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I have to be there. I don't like coffee, but I have 3 cups. Up, down, up, down, up, down. You people circle up at the end of that thing to pray, and I'm out of there. Because I don't know the words to the Lord's Prayer, and you're not going to pull my punk card like that. And so I come late. I leave early. I'm a complete and utter disruption. I've got no interest in being sober. I've got no interest in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got nothing. And we do that for a couple of months. Now, I'm going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous in and around Akron, Ohio. They have some very clear ideas about how you ought to behave in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous in and around Akron, Ohio in that day. And we weren't living up to those ideals. And so there was the president of Alcoholics Anonymous. His name was Mac Shadburn, and Mac had been sober since Christ was a child. And he was very old. And he had the entryway. He and his guys, they ran the door. And he had and it was a greeters, like walking through the gauntlet of these, smiling, shaking newcomers. And they were shaking hands and passing you along. And really, some of them were kind of old-fashioned sniffers. The guys who'd been sober a long time, they'd shake your hand, they'd pull you in real close, and they'd go, They just wanted to know whether or not you had booze on your breath. And I saw one guy come in one night, he had a little booze on his breath, he disappeared into a side room. I didn't know what happened in that side room, but I was not interested in finding out. But Mac would sit in the back of the room by the door, and he ran everything from the back of that room. And there was a woman, her name was Jane, and I hated Jane. Jane was also sober since Christ was a child. She was sober way longer than I had been alive. She was 73 years old, and she would get to the meeting, and when she would arrive, she had her own parking place out back by the back door. And nobody ever parked there. But a newcomer would be driving Jane, and they'd pull in, and they would holler down, they'd say, "Jane's here." And 4 newcomers would go grab a wooden high-back chair. They would carry it out car side, gently load her into it. She had white hair pulled back into a bun. She smoked cigarettes on an extender. She glowed. And they would carry her into the meeting like the Pope being carried through the mall. And they would gently sit her down right there in front of the podium at the head of the room. And everybody would come up and greet her and smile and give her hugs, and she would have general conversation about their lives, and she seemed to know everyone, and she cared, and everybody loved her, and I just avoided her like the plague. Hated that woman. And she and Mac would argue about things across the room, just to make sure that AA stayed pure. And when somebody, God help you, if you stood at the podium of Alcoholics Anonymous and misquoted our literature, it was very ugly. And God help you if you were disrespectful to Alcoholics Anonymous behind the podium of Alcoholics Anonymous, because Jane, I saw it on 2 occasions, Jane would say, well, clearly you're not ready to speak from behind a podium at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Please be seated. And she'd look around the room and she'd say, Gary, get up and tell your story for whatever time we have left. And she would remove speakers from the podium. And she didn't have to move or do anything to exert herself at all. She would just say it, and all of a sudden the speaker would be horrified and they would just slink off to the side. And somebody else would get up and take their place who could act respectfully behind the podium. They hated us. Mac and Jane and their crew, they hated my sister and I. Because again, I'm coming in late, I'm making noise, I'm up, down, up, down, up, down, I'm talking, I'm writing notes, I'm getting dates, I am absolutely out of control at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I don't want to be there. I am sober, I am sick, and I just need some freaking relief, and I'm not getting it sitting in these meetings. And I just need to go. And I'm there against my will. And Mac, and I would always sneak out the door, right, the door that he was tending. That was the only way in and out of the church basement. And one day I am sneaking because I would go to the back of the wall and then I'd kind of slide down the wall real quiet and slip out, right, when you guys were circling up. And one day I do that and I ran into somebody and I looked over and Mac was standing at the door like this. And he had these glasses that would sit down on the end of his nose, and he just looked at me and he said, get in the circle. So I got in the circle. And I stayed for the Lord's Prayer. I bowed my head really low so that you wouldn't see that I didn't know the words. And as soon as the Lord's Prayer was over, I was back to the door, and Mac had not moved a muscle. And he looked at me and he said, are you alcoholic? Now, I'm diagnosed with alcoholism. Everybody had called me alcoholic. Everybody had an impression that I had alcoholism, but nobody had ever asked me if I had alcoholism. Nobody ever asked me if I was alcoholic. And so I gave him the only answer I had. And he said, can you control your drinking? Now, this is something, I listen to you people talk about this. This is some fascinating stuff. Because I'm like, why in the world would you want to control your drinking? These people are obsessed with controlling their drinking, but who wants to control their drinking? My God. What are you supposed to do? Have a drink or two, get a little warm, fuzzy feeling, and stop? Seriously? Why in the world would you do that? That's not oblivion. That's not relief. Why would you control your drinking? And what is controlling my drinking? Does that mean 5, or does that mean 12, or does that mean 14, or half a bottle, or full? What is controlling our drinking, and why are you people so freaking obsessed about it? What I don't know is that what he's really asking me is, when you drink, does a phenomena, a craving kick in and make you unable to stop drinking? I don't know that that's what he's really asking me, but this whole idea about controlling my drinking and drinking like a social drinker, I got nothing. And so I gave him the only answer that I have. And he handed me $5. He said, here's $5, go find out. He said, and if it doesn't work, try to control your drinking. If it does not work, you get back here. If it does work, I never want to see you again. And I went and I found my sister, and I'm like, go get your $5, we're out of here. Woo! Oh my gosh, and so we went out on a run that night that was completely unmatched, and that was not my intention. I had heard a little bit about what you people were saying. Some of it seeps in. Even if you're here against your will and you're acting badly and you're doing the best you can to get nothing, some of this crap we say in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's so repetitive. You know, like you're thinking, oh, I don't want to go to that speaker meeting because that, it's that same guy and he's going to tell that same story over and over and over. Well, you know what? Sometimes I need to hear things over and over and over because it seeps in, even if I'm trying to block you because I don't like you. Not that I ever do that. And so I had heard some of this stuff, so I thought, okay, I'm going to have 3 shots and 2 beers. I mean, I've been sober, physically sober, for like 4.5 or 5 months. I should be able, 3 shots and 2 beers, to me, that's very moderate drinking. It's far less than a fifth of vodka, right? And where are my people? And so I'm going to have 3 shots and 2 beers. I'm just going to get a little drunk. I'm just going to take the edge off because my shoulders have been on my ears and my little hands have been balled up in fists, and I am living in utter and complete and unending terror every day. And I'm sore, and I'm tired, and I'm sick. And I can't sleep because when I close my eyes, the merry-go-round runs. And when it's too quiet, I hear things. And I got no relief. And I need it. I need it. But what I also don't want to do is I don't want to drink like that anymore. I don't want to drink like that. I don't want to have to go there anymore. So if I could just drink a little and just get my shoulders a little off my ears and let loose a little bit and just let the terror subside for a second and maybe breathe all the way in and all the way out. I don't want to drink any more than that. If I can just stop right there, that'll be great. And so that's what I set out to do because I heard something when I was in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't want to drink like I had been drinking. I didn't want to go there anymore because some things do get better just with physical sobriety. And I didn't want to have to do that stuff anymore. And so I had my 3 shots and my 2 beers. I drank them very fast because that's what we do when we're drinking for effect. So I drank them very, very fast and they hit. And my shoulders, they came off my ears a little. And my hands started to let loose. And I thought, I think my formula was just a little off. It just was a little off. So if I have one more shot and one more beer and one more shot and one more beer, and before you know it, guess where I go? I cross the tracks again. Because again, what I had set out ran out. And when I have alcoholism, I'm a real alcoholic. I have a head that tells me that drinking is my only answer. It's the only way for me to get the relief I'm after. It's the only thing that's ever worked. Don't you remember? It's the only thing that's ever worked. So go drink. And I have a body that once I begin drinking, I have absolutely no ability to stop drinking at what's reasonable. I just don't have that ability. And so once I begin to drink, the allergy of the body is triggered, the phenomena of craving kicks in, and my head says, it's okay, just stay right here, it won't be like that again. And before I know it, it's like that again. And I came to the next day, not remembering everything, because I'm a blackout drinker, and I like the fact that I'm a blackout drinker. I remember enough. And I come to the next day, and it just settles on me, and I said, oh my God. I am young, I am otherwise healthy, and this is what it's going to be like for a very, very long time. And then you know who I heard in my head? Mac. If it doesn't work, you get back here. And I thought, oh my God, really? I have to go to AA for the rest of my life? And that night, I walked into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got there on time. I sat in the middle. I only had 1 cup of coffee. I didn't write any notes. I didn't get any dates. And I didn't try to sneak out before the Lord's Prayer. As soon as y'all circled up, I got in your damn circle. And I stood there, and as soon as the meeting was over, I headed toward the door. I still wasn't real interested in hanging out any longer than I had to. And guess who was standing in the door? Mac. And he looked at me and he said, did you get a sponsor? And I thought, how did he know? And I just looked at him and I said, no. And he said, you'll get a sponsor before you leave this room tonight. Now, I knew that it was girls with girls and boys with boys, whatever. You guys got some funny rules around here. And so I walk up to every woman in that room and I said, will you sponsor me? And every woman in that room said, no. Oh, no. So I walked back up to Mac and he said, well, did you get a sponsor? And I said, no one in this room will sponsor me. He said, that's a lie. I said, I'm not asking her. He said, "Oh, yes, you are." And I said, and he just stood there. And then he used that finger and went. And I walked up to Jane, who was still seated in her appointed position. And I had to wait on her to finish some, lovely and loving conversation with someone else who was clearly in my way. And I just looked at her and I said, "Will you sponsor me?" And she looked at me and took a draw of her cigarette extender. She blew it out and she said, "Oh, honey, why should I?" Now, that's a reasonable question. It's a reasonable question. And instead of telling her where to shove her cigarette extender, which was all I could come up with, what I said instead was, "Because I need to be sober and I don't know how." And then I thought, who said that? Oh my God, who said that? And she said, "Well, if that's the case, then you'll be doing some things differently, won't you?" And she gave me my list of things I would no longer be doing. And she gave me the list of things that I would now be doing. How many meetings I was going to a week, how many pages in the big book I was reading every day, how many times I was going to pray even though I didn't have any idea who God was, all of that stuff. And I just stood there and I listened. And when she was done, she just looked at me and she said, "Well?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I had no idea where that came from. I didn't have those kind of manners. I'd never called anybody ma'am in my entire life. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I walked away knowing that my life was over. Absolutely over. I just turned over my care and my life over to the care of Jane, a 73-year-old woman. I'm 15 years old, and I just know that life is not going to get any better from here. I'm done. And so the next day, I get home from school, I'm sitting there doing my homework, and this enormous Ford LTD. Do you guys remember the Ford LTDs from the mid-'70s? They were like the size of a boat. And they seemed to sit on chassis that were not quite large enough for the car, so they kind of floated. And when you wanted to make a turn with one of those things, they had great big steering wheels, and you could steer them with one finger, but you had to make the decision to turn half a block back, because you had to kind of start it. And by the time it'd get up to the corner, it'd kind of float around the corner, and then it would head in that direction. You guys remember those cars? So one of those comes floating into my driveway at 7 o'clock. And I'm looking, and it stops in my driveway. It takes them a while to stop. And I look out the window, and my ma says, "Who's that?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, go find out." So my ma's watching, and I walk out in the driveway, and I knock on the door, and there's two old guys sitting in this car, and they're listening to country music, smoking cigarettes, and laughing about something. And one of them rolls down the window, and I said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Jane sent us, get in the car." I was like, "What?" He said, "Jane sent us, get in the car." I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "To an A&A meeting, get in the car." And I was like, "No, I'm good. I'm good." He just looked at me and he said, "Jane sent us, get in the car." And I went up to the house and I was like, "Ma, AA's here?" And she said, "Okay, honey, have fun." And I went out and I got in the car. Now, you could fit 12 newcomers in the back seat of that car. And I'm sitting in the back of this car, and these guys are smoking and listening to music and telling bad jokes and having a great time and completely ignoring the fact that I'm back there. And I am like, what in the world is going on? And I'm looking around to see who watched me get in the car. And all of a sudden, we show up at this church. And we're the only people there. And one of the guys has the key. And we go in, and I'm like, "Well, where is everybody?" They said, "They'll be here in a bit." And they get out this coffee pot that's that tall. And they teach me how to set up a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Put that chair over there, circle those things up, get in here and put water in this coffee urn. They taught me how to make coffee, how to set up a meeting. I was not interested in learning any of that. But there I was. And then we sat there. And they talked, and I just stared at them, wondering what in the world I had gotten myself into. And then people came in for the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was a speaker meeting. It was a Barberton Monday night meeting. It's still happening today in that very, very room. And it had what I called Whitehead Row. And all the people with white hair, they sat along this one wall, and they would critique the speaker out loud. And in Northeast Ohio, when you get up and give a pitch like this, as soon as your pitch was over, you would sit down next to the microphone, and then they would open the floor for comments. And you'd just pray that you hadn't said anything untoward, because they were going to get you if you had. And so, but they would critique the speaker. And so we clean up the meeting, because of course we're the cleanup crew too. We clean up the meeting, we get back in the car, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God that's done. And it's not done. Do you know what's next? The freaking donut shop. That's what's next. There's no meeting in Northeast Ohio without going out for coffee and something sweet afterwards. And so there I am at the freaking donut shop. And you know what we're talking about at the donut shop? Everything that we had just discussed at the meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't understand it the first time, and here we've got to run through it a second time. And here was the deal. I had one of those cars in my driveway every single night of the week. I had a Monday crew, a Tuesday crew, a Wednesday crew, a Thursday crew. What I didn't know is that they had held a group conscience. And they said, well, what in the world are we supposed to do with these youngins who are in here? And they said, well, hell, we don't know. What are we supposed to do with them? And one person in that group, one man who says very, very little, his name was Bill Long. And Bill Long says, well, I suppose if God gave them to us, they're ours. But they had no idea what they were supposed to do. And they said, well, they're going to need a sponsor. And they looked around the room, and nobody was making eye contact. And one of them looks at Jane and says, these girls are very, very damaged. They probably won't listen to anybody who's not at least the age of their grandparents. And Jane said, I don't have the energy to sponsor those girls. And they said, that's all right. If you'll lead, we'll all help. And so 2 of them took Monday, 2 of them took Tuesday, 2 of them took Wednesday, 2 of them took Thursday. And then they signed themselves up for the steps. I had a God squad, I had an inventory crew, I had folks that kept a keen eye on all my character defects. And they decided that because God had delivered them into the arms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I was their responsibility. And they were uniquely qualified to save the lives of other alcoholics, no matter how old or young we were. And what I can tell you is that I walked back into Alcoholics Anonymous, my sister did not. My sister never heard her story in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because my sister did not have alcoholism. My sister had drug addiction, and that was not her room. It was not her room. But I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't get sober in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober in donut shops around Northeast Ohio. And I can tell you that I went to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, but meetings were really the venue that would get us to the donut shop. It was like some distraction that we had to go do because there might be another newcomer who needed to go to the donut shop. It's like that's where we would go to collect the folks for the donut shop. That was the entire intent of that meeting. And we would go and we'd collect the newcomers, and off we would go to the donut shop, and we would talk about the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We would read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't allowed to talk in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Jane would say really mean things to me, like meetings is where we talk about the solution. You don't know anything about that, and you won't be spreading your disease. So I was not allowed to speak in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was allowed to ask the chairperson to bring up a topic for me. I was allowed to take notes, and I was allowed to ask any clarifying question I had at the donut shop. And those guys absolutely dug in no matter what kind of a brat I was, no matter how late I would run them, no matter what antics I pulled to try to get out of going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. They showed up every single day. They were consistent, they were kind, they were loving toward me, even though I hadn't earned any of that from them. And they absolutely put me onto the program of Alcoholics Anonymous as it's outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, not some rendition of it that they had gotten through playing the game of telephone, where it changes the farther away from the book it gets. They had gone back to the book, and one of the guys said, he said, we never did do it perfect. Billy and I were talking about this a little bit last night. He said, but they wrote it down so that we'd all at least be doing the same thing imperfectly. And so I got sober in those donut shops, and you know what? They absolutely finished raising me. You see, I needed parented, I needed love, I needed some consistency from some people who weren't going to harm me and who weren't going to try to take things from me. And members of Alcoholics Anonymous who had their own wounds to heal with their own children were able to heal some of those wounds by caring for me. And I was able to understand the people in my life my mom and my dad and that extended family that was just so freaking crazy. I was able to understand them, and I was able to move toward forgiveness for them. Because you know what? The guy who picked me up on Wednesday, he was my dad 3 years before when he had gotten sober. He was that guy. He treated his kids the way my dad treated me. And we were able to have that conversation one night at a donut shop. And both of us cried, and we both healed a little bit. And he needed to make a measurable difference in the life of a young person, and I needed to be parented. That's the stuff we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's not written down super clearly in our book, but it certainly tells us that stay tuned because great events will come to pass. And what is greater than watching our souls heal as we sit at donut shops? I mean, what is greater than that? And they put me on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. They saved my life from alcoholism so that now today, I am uniquely qualified to save the lives of other alcoholics. And I get to participate in that over and over and over and over. Now, I've been sober for 25, almost 26 years now, and life has not been simple. It has not necessarily been easy, but life has been exactly what it is. It is life. It is me trying to live in a great big world with you, and we bump into each other from time to time, and sometimes it's loving and sometimes it's not. And there's been incredible opportunities and lots of movement, and I've gotten to, I graduated from high school and they launched me off to college. We're sitting at the donut shop with my financial aid forms, and they're like, well, how much money does your mama make? Trying to fill out these forms to get me some grants to go to school, and I was like, well, I don't know, and they're like, well, it can't be much. And we filled out forms, and I sat at the donut shop and wrote essays for, college applications, and we mailed them all off, and we all waited to see if I'd get into college, and they would weigh in on what college they wanted me to go to based on how far away from home it was. And Akron is pretty close in the town that I lived in. It's called Worcester, and that's on the edge of Amish country in Ohio. And so there were Amish folks who were in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I learned that people with absolutely no God, which was me, no understanding of God, no training in God, no history in church, none of that, could sit in a room with these people who came from this incredibly structured system where every breath was about God, and that we suffered from the same illness, and that we participated in the same process. And so the idea of God as I understand him came to life for me in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they came to care for me, even though I was fairly certain they were horrified by me and the things that I had been allowed to do or whatever with my life. And their wives, the wives would come and they would sit in the kitchens. And they would sit in there and they would bake pies for us to eat warm pie after the meetings were over. It was really a lovely place, actually. We should all go there. Thursday night pie night in Fredericksburg, Ohio. And I would go there. I would slip out of the meeting sometimes, and I would go drink coffee with the women in the kitchen. And they would talk to me about what it was like to live in the arms of God. And I really had no upbringing with God when I was a little kid. I had no introduction to him. I had nothing. And my God squad, my couple of guys, and they were the guys who had spiritual language. Jane had no spiritual language whatsoever. She did not talk about God, although clearly she glowed and she had this wild outpouring of love, so clearly God was in her and flowed through her, but she didn't have the words for that. So she gave me my God team. And they knew that the most important thing that they could do once I stopped drinking was to get me into some kind of a relationship with some kind of an idea of God. They knew that beyond everything else, that if they could pull that off, they were good and I could launch from their care and go to college. But if they didn't pull that off, I couldn't go anywhere until they had. And so sitting in those rooms and having those conversations with people of incredible faith and with people of mediocre faith and of people who were struggling to build a little bit of faith allowed me to be exactly where I was. And one of the times sitting at the donut shop, I was complaining about random problem X over and over and over and over because, we like to obsess on the problems that aren't abating in our time frame. And one of the guys, he was on my God squad, and he just kept saying, pray about it, pray about it, pray about it, pray about it. And finally I looked at him and I said, I don't know how. And he said, give me your book. And I gave him my book, and he used a highlighter and he highlighted the simple prayers in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He slid it back across the table and he said, pick one and try it. And that's how I started to pray. And wouldn't you know, the more often I prayed about things, the more quickly things abated and the more quickly things were restored to something that made sense to me. And then I started taking responsibility for the outcomes. That went over well. But they just taught me slowly over time what it was like to live in a relationship with God. They taught me when I took my third step, they told me, they said, what you're doing is you're cutting a deal with God. You are signing up to have a relationship with God right here, right now. And you're not going to do it perfectly. He is, but you're not. But are you willing to participate in a relationship with God and to allow it to grow? And I said, well, do I have to? And they said, yes. And I said, fine. And so I struck a deal with God, and I've gone back and made that deal stronger. But on that very first pass, I did it because I had to. And I took very, very simple beginning steps. And thank God our book says that he does not make too hard of terms with those who seek him. All I had to be willing to do was say that I knew that I needed it. And I didn't need it because I wanted it. I needed it because they weren't going to let me do anything fun until I did it. And that was good enough to make a start. And you know, throughout the years, my relationship has absolutely grown and changed and become bigger and then smaller and bigger again and deeper and more shallow and deeper again. And I've had all kinds of opportunities to get on the dance floor with God and to go around that floor. I've had all kinds of opportunities to really lay my life at his feet and to do what he would have me do. I've had real opportunities to walk away from him and say, what you're asking me to do is too hard, no thank you. I have had opportunities to be in a relationship with God that is very, very real. And I have chosen to do it every which way. And what I can report to you is that as long as I stay in relationship with you, God's got a chance. Because I hear him through you. You know, I go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous today to hear God and to gather newcomers for the donut shop. But God speaks through you. And so when people get 30 years of sobriety and they stop going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I think, what are you doing? I need to hear the way God speaks through you. Please come back and be part of us. And what's more is I worry about them because I think, my God, how are they hearing God if they're not here? And today, I have faith in God that is absolutely unmatched. You know, I had spent, years of sobriety, doing the right thing, always having a home group, sponsoring lots of people, doing service positions, all of that stuff that we do as good members of Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, I understand to my limited human extent the sizable gift that I was given by being placed into your care. I get it most days. I get it to an extent. And I know that I owe. I will always owe. And so I'm here and I do this thing. And and there are instructions in our book about abandon yourself to God, abandon yourself to God, abandon yourself to God. Well, that does not mean, come to find out to my shock and dismay, that does not mean that I get to piecemeal out my pieces of my life to God and say, here, you can have work, but leave boys alone. Oh, here, you can have this part and this part and this part, but you can't have all of this. Abandonment is a 100% deal, and I didn't know that. And I had given God every area of my life except the relationship area of my life, every single area of my life. And so, because of that, I'd been in and out of all kinds of interesting relationships. Married and divorced in AA, that's fun. You should give that a try. I mean, if you guys were bored at your home group, have a couple of newcomers get married. They bring all kinds of drama. But I had participated in all kinds of relationships, and one day, I don't even remember how sober I was. I don't know, 15, 16, maybe 15 years of sobriety. Anyway, I had met a man, his name was Lee, and Lee was 6'1", and he was bald and had blue eyes, and he was a big corn-fed boy from Oklahoma, so he was, real thick, and he was a major in the Marine Corps, and, and he said ma'am a lot, and he did the right thing for the right reasons all the time, and people respected him, and I just adored him, and we rode Harleys together, and we golfed together, and he was my best friend, and I was head over heels in love with this guy, and he was head over heels in love with me, and we were having a great, great, great time. And it was just awesome. And God was constantly in my ear saying, abandon yourself to me. I want you to surrender more fully. I want you to give me that one area of your life that you've never given to me before. And I was thinking, I hear you, God, but no. Do you see him? No, I got this. This is the best one I've ever picked. I got it. And God kept saying, why are you settling for less than I would have for you? I have perfect love to give you, and you continue to block me. Why are you doing this? My daughter, I am your father, and I have what's best for you. But you're going to have to abandon yourself to me. You're going to have to give it all up. And let me give you what's perfect. Let me give you perfect love. And I was holding on, and I said, no, I got it. Thank you, but no. Well, if you ever really want to get restless so you can't even sit still in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, tell God no. That works great. And so he and I are in this conversation, and finally I'm speaking at a convention, actually the same one I talked about earlier in New Orleans, and it's the most Catholic city on the planet. And I'm in New Orleans, and it's Easter weekend in 2005, right before the storm. I'd been dating Lee for a couple of years, and God comes to me, and I can't sleep. He has me up all night long in prayer and meditation. And God comes to me and says, now, it's time. I want it all. And I was finally broken, and I just started to cry, and I said, fine, I'm yours. I will give him up. I will do whatever you want. I will come alone. I will sit at your knees, and you can use me. And I knew that he wanted me to go home, and he wanted me to break up with Lee, and I didn't understand why, and it didn't make any sense to me, but I knew that God was very persistent with me in my meditation. And I was there with Walter Hall, who's the gentleman from Houston that Judy had sent me greetings from. Walter Hall was there that weekend, and he said, I think I was sent here to deliver a message just to you. And I'm thinking, well, aren't you just an egotistical little guy thinking you know God's will for you? Like I hadn't been doing the same thing. And I sit there, and he speaks. God speaks through Walter to me and delivers a message to me, and God just simply said, look, it is time for you to be baptized and to get into right relationship with me, and he's a distraction, and he's got to go. And I went home, and I broke up with him, and he and I were an absolute wreck. We were a wreck, and I tell him that I'm leaving him, and I tell him why, and he said, so let me get this straight. You're leaving me for God. And I said, yes. And he said, are you sure there's not another guy? And I said, oh, God, no, that would be a lot easier. No, I'm leaving you for God. I said, I'm going to go become Catholic, and you're a distraction, and I can't be with somebody who doesn't love God the way I do. And he said, I love God. And I said, you don't even pray. I said, there's no way that I would ever know that you had a relationship with God at all, and I need to be with somebody who can help me have a relationship with God. I said, he's been very clear with me. And so I go and I start my process that I have to walk through in order to become baptized and to do the things in order to grow spiritually. And what I don't know is that Lee walks over and talks to his battalion chaplain and tells the chaplain, he's like, Deb left me. And the battalion chaplain, his name's Curtis. Now, he's an Assemblies of God pastor. Now, if you know Catholic, Assemblies of God, right? In the way they approach their relationship with God and their relationship with Christ. And so, anyway, and Curtis says to Lee, says, well, what is she doing? He said, she's going to become Catholic, and said, I'm a distraction. What am I supposed to do? And Curtis, who's the Assemblies of God pastor, he says, I don't know, man, she's pretty great. I think I'd go to Mass if I were you. And so Lee comes and finds me, and he and I start down this path together. And we become engaged, and we take a year, and we both join the same faith. I get baptized. We get all of our sacraments. We're participating in this deal together, and everything is absolutely amazing, and it's working really, really well. And after we join the church together and we build this spiritual language, we get married, and then he leaves to go to Iraq to take a small team of guys. And so he leaves and he goes to Iraq, and they're outside the wire living in the streets of Fallujah. And it's incredibly dangerous, and it's the first time that I had had to support someone in a wartime deployment, and so we're both learning a lot. And every opportunity I got to talk to him, he was able to ask me questions like, or I was able to ask him questions like, honey, how can I pray for you? We didn't have that language before I left him. We didn't have that language before I broke up with him. We didn't have that language until we came together and worked on putting God into the middle of the deal. And so we walked through that deployment together, and I walked through that deployment knowing that I was 100% powerless in my human condition to do anything, and all I could do was rest in the arms of God. And so my relationship with him grew. And Lee came home from that deployment, and so did all of his guys, and they did really, really well. And he got a Bronze Star, and he came back, and then he left again, and he went and snapped in as the XO of a battalion, and they did workups, and they went back to war, and he was only home for a few months in between those two things. And they went back over to war. They went to Afghanistan. They set up in Helmand Province, where they had not yet been. And they took the fight to the Taliban, and they absolutely lost lots and lots of guys. When I spoke at the Texas State Convention in Odessa, they were deployed to Afghanistan, and I had gotten a call just before I got up to speak that his unit had just lost 3 men. And so it was a very, very difficult deployment on everyone. And I knew that there were things that were happening to him over there that were absolutely changing his heart, that were changing the way he saw the world, and that were giving him, he was getting that merry-go-round in his head installed. And when he would close his eyes, I knew that he was going to see things. And I knew what that was like, but mine was from a different source, but I knew what it was like. And I just prayed, because again, I knew that in my humanness I could do nothing, but that through God all things were possible, and I rested in his arms. And Lee came home from that deployment. And he was home, and I prayed every single morning. I said, God, please show me what I'm supposed to do as a wife to help my husband come all the way home, because it took him a while. And finally, he was coming all the way home, and we started doing things like talking about our future together and things of that nature. And because you don't ever talk about the future when you're married to someone who's deploying to war, that's just kind of silly. You know, you focus on getting through the here and now. We'd start talking about our future and all of those kinds of things. And it was absolutely an amazing time. Because I was watching him come back, and we were checking in, and we were snapping into this relationship together. And I'm working for the Marine Corps at the time, and he and I are leaving the same base. And I go home. I'd worked 14 hours that day. I go home. I'm waiting on him. I fall asleep waiting on him. And all of a sudden, I wake up, and I know that something's not right. And I pick up the phone, and I call the battalion, and I say, has anybody seen Major Helton? And one of the captains gets on the phone and says, I'm so sorry, Deb, but Lee was killed on his way home. And so, and at that moment, there will be moments like that for all of us. There'll be moments like that in life where we have to rely on the relationships that we already have built. And I'm so incredibly grateful that I already had a relationship built with God, because the moment that I got that news, I prayed. And I said something like, God, I have no idea how to breathe, and I have no idea what to do next. The man whom I love more than life itself is now dead, and I don't know what to do next. And I felt this loving presence just wrap itself around me like a lover does when he would stand behind the woman that he loves and wraps himself around her. And I felt this warm presence just wrap itself around me. And all God said in my ear was, I'm here. He didn't say this is going to be okay. He didn't say you're going to be fine. He didn't say any of that. He just said, I'm here. And walking through that process, you know, the Marines came, we were sitting outside, and we're watching the sun come up, and I had sent out 3 text messages to 3 different folks in Alcoholics Anonymous in the middle of the night in different areas of the country. And I'm sitting out there, and Colonel Reed, who is absolutely, he belongs on the Cheerios box as a Marine, because he says the right thing in the right way for all, he is that guy. He'll probably be a general officer someday. He's sitting out front with me. He's been there all night. He was the CO of 27, and Lee was his XO. And I looked at him and I said, oh my God, John. I said, there's something you need to know. And he said, what is that? I said, I've been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous for 22 years. And he said, okay. And I said, what that means is that when the sun gets up over that mountain, they're coming. And he said, okay. And I said, John, they don't look like the people you're used to hanging out with. And when they get here, they're going to take over everything. And he said, okay. And he was looking toward the driveway, and I was looking the other way, and I watched his face all of a sudden, and his face went. And I looked at him, I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I think they're here." And here come the members of my home group walking up my driveway, and leading the pack is my friend Matthew. And Matthew is 6'2", 6'3". He's an enormous human. He is homosexual, and he prances a bit when he walks, and he had blue hair and lots of earrings in his ears, and he wears clothes that don't match on purpose. And here you came. And you just kept coming over and over and over and over. And that was 3.5 years ago. And what I can tell you is that I've grieved out loud. I've done the heavy lifting. When I'm sad, I was sad. When I was not sad, I didn't chase it down. I grieved out loud. I told the truth. I allowed Alcoholics Anonymous once again to heal my soul and to make me stronger. And I rested in the arms of God. And one quick thing, everybody when I was going through that process was trying to convince me that it was okay for me to be angry with God because he was big enough and he could take it. And I was listening to that conversation. I'm having that out-of-body experience, and I'm thinking, there's got to be another way. I don't want to be angry with God, you see, because he's already walked with me through Afghanistan and through Iraq and through alcoholism and healing and all this stuff, and I don't want to be angry with God, but maybe I'm supposed to be angry with God. You know, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, "God, if there's another way to do this other than being angry with you, would you let me know what it is?" And here you came. And you just kept coming over and over and over and over. And that was 3.5 years ago. And what I can tell you is that I've grieved out loud. I've done the heavy lifting. When I'm sad, I was sad. When I was not sad, I didn't chase it down. I grieved out loud. I told the truth. I allowed Alcoholics Anonymous once again to heal my soul and to make me stronger. And I rested in the arms of God. And one quick thing, everybody when I was going through that process was trying to convince me that it was okay for me to be angry with God because he was big enough and he could take it. And I was listening to that conversation. I'm having that out-of-body experience, and I'm thinking, there's got to be another way. I don't want to be angry with God, you see, because he's already walked with me through Afghanistan and through Iraq and through alcoholism and healing and all this stuff, and I don't want to be angry with God, but maybe I'm supposed to be angry with God. You know, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, "God, if there's another way to do this other than being angry with you, would you let me know what it is?" And Walter Hall from Houston, Texas, he rang my phone. And he said, "Darling," he had to get through, he told my friend Christine who was keeping the phone, he said, "Tell her Walter's on the phone," he had called 3 times, "and that I have a message for her from God." Because he was one of my messengers, and she brings me the phone, and she's like, "Walter's on the phone, says he has a message for you from God." And I was like, "Yes, give me the phone." And Walter gets on the phone, and he says, "Darling, I love you." I said, "I love you too." And Walter's an old Marine, and he and Lee were big fans of one another. And he said, "God needed me to call you and let you know that there are things that happen in this world that break his heart. And Lee's death was one of them. And that the two of you will be grieving together and that you can rest in his arms." And folks, that's been true my entire life. When bad things happen, it's not because God brought me bad things, but God stays in my corner, and he swings when I'm too tired. And he holds me while I heal. And because of that, there's not a moment that goes by that I don't know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that God's got me. I have a faith today. I started out with nothing. And I have a faith today that is 100% unshakable. 100% unshakable. One quick story and then I'm done. James is probably holding his breath. One of my priests, he went and he did a retreat he's a Franciscan, and he went and did a retreat for Franciscan nuns. And one of the nuns was celebrating her 80th year of having vows. She was 98 years old. And he was sitting with her real quickly, and he said, "Sister, it's amazing that you have had faith in Jesus for 80 years. I mean, that's just amazing." And she's 98 years old, and she tapped him on the leg, and she said, "Oh, Father, you have it all wrong. It is he who has had faith in me for 80 years, not the other way around." Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.